A little background here. My father was in the Army for 21 years. He retired and moved to a very small town in Central Florida. He got bored after a couple of years, and even though we didn't need the money between his retirement and what my mom was making as a tax prep, he wanted to go back to work. He started working at various gas stations, and with it being a small town, the owners didn't care if I came there and helped him out with stocking the coolers, or even running the register, as long as I didn't sell any beer or smokes. The actual story I'm going to tell took place in 1990, and I remember the date well, because it was shortly after my 15th birthday. I had just gotten my learner's permit, and my dad would let me drive him to and from work, just to get some experience on the road, both that day and at night. I was sitting in my usual spot at a table that was set up along the windows, book in hand, feet propped up, and a Mountain Dew on the table along with some snacks. I would generally spend most of the evening that way, reading books, getting up to run to the register, and stocking the coolers at different times. I remember glancing up because something caught my attention that was unusual, and I realized that a lady was walking up our parking lot from the direction of the interstate. The gas station was right on I-75. This in itself was really strange, because where we were located, you didn't get many people walking, and definitely not walking from the direction of the interstate. I figured she had broken down somewhere, and was coming to use the phone to call for a tow truck or something. I was completely wrong. She came into the store, looked around for a few minutes, and I remember getting just a strange and creepy feeling about her. She walked up to the counter and started telling my dad a story about how she had gotten stranded and needed a ride up to the next big town up north, Ocala. My dad let her know that he was working and that there was no way that he could take her. She then turned and looked at me, and while she was looking away from him, my dad caught my eye and subtly shook his head no. I was confused for a second, but then she turned back to my dad and pointed at me, asking if I could take her. My dad responded back that I only had a learner's permit and wouldn't be able to drive her anywhere and then drive back. Normally, I would have done it, even though it was illegal, because I'd done it a few times before already. I didn't argue with my dad, since this was completely out of character for him. He was normally chatty with the customers, but for whatever reason, he was almost curt and dismissive of her. It turns out, he had a bad vibe about her from the minute he had seen her walking up the drive. Well, she cussed him out for a minute, and he basically told her to get out of the store. She slammed the door open. I thought the glass was going to break from how hard she had slammed it, and then she walked out of the store and down the driveway. I kept an eye on her, and continued to watch as she made her way back up to the interstate, and then started up the northbound on-ramp. Almost a year passed, and I was in my bedroom, less than a week before my 16th birthday. I heard my dad yelling from the living room, "Get down here right now." I quickly ran to the living room and saw my dad pointing at the TV, and looked at the mugshot of the lady up on the screen, and immediately remembered that it was the lady who had been in the store. It turns out, I almost gave a car ride to Eileen Vornos, who was convicted of being a serial killer and then later put to death. I still have nightmares about what could have happened. In 2006, I was a college student at ASU. I lived in an off-campus apartment on the ground floor. It was a block off of a major street here in Phoenix called Baseline. These details are important. In the summer of 2006, Phoenix, Arizona was plagued by two serial killers. One was the Phoenix shooter, who ended up being a team of two guys randomly shooting people, and the other was the Baseline killer, a rapist and murderer. Having two serial killers put the entire city on edge, and everyone was talking about it. I even saw articles in Time or Newsweek about the situation. So, the semester in the fall of 2006 had just started. Now, you may have heard this, but Phoenix is hot in August. It would get stuffy in my apartment, so I'd leave the window cracked a little because the morning air was nice. The blinds provide a visual cover. Anyways, one morning, a strange sound woke me up. It was the crack of dawn, 4:45 a.m., and the sun was just barely coming up. It was the sound of someone lightly tapping on the window, and it seemed intentional. In my tired state, I figured it could be a bird or some branches or something trivial. After about 90 seconds of nothing, the tapping returned, and it was absolutely purposeful. I was positive it was a human producing this noise. I thought it was my boyfriend, who thought it was cute to try and scare me sometimes. I decided I'd be a bit of a brat and make him wait, but I was also getting really angry. I was pretty upset that he was trying to pull a prank on me, especially when I was sleeping, so I planned on giving him a piece of my mind about this. At a certain point, I got up to get a glass of water, still being in the mindset of wanting to annoy my stupid boyfriend who thought this would be funny. Then I saw some movement through the slit in the blinds, so I marched over and yanked the blinds open so I could see. It was definitely not my boyfriend. I said very loudly, "What the hell?" He sort of seemed taken back by my anger, but only slightly. The man I saw will be with me forever, or more specifically, his eyes and the feeling they gave me were insanely creepy. Honestly, words can't do justice as to how terrifying his eyes were. They looked like black orbs with no white in them, absolutely predatory. When I see pictures of Ted Bundy or Charles Manson, that's exactly what his eyes looked like. Even if you saw a picture of how they looked, it's different than when you experience it in person. It totally floored me. Something about this man was profoundly wrong. He was crouched down, like an umpire. He had on dark pants, a dark purple shirt, and a dark Nike hat. Anyways, after I yelled "what the hell" at him, he whispered to me, "Can I talk to you?" If you want to know how insanely creepy that is to hear, just whisper that sentence out loud to yourself right now. It still sends chills down my spine when I think of how that sounded. His hand subtly moved towards his waist. I later learned he would blitz attack his victims and he probably had a gun. All that separated us was a mesh screen. Now, this had only been about a 3-second interaction at this point. For some reason, I thought of Ted Bundy and how he'd pretend to be crippled to target his victims. I thought of my mom telling me to not be nice to strangers. My thinking wasn't as calculated as all that, but it was more than the nano-processing of how to deal with the situation. So, when he whispered that, I started yelling at him, "Hell no, get the hell out of here," adding in a couple of slurs into that sentence. I shut the window and angrily locked it. I can't overemphasize how incredibly irritated I was that this person had the audacity to disturb my precious sleep. I laid back down and wondered if I'd been too mean. What if he needed help? But that didn't really make any sense. Why would he be tapping and whispering if he was truly in trouble? I decided he was a creep after all. I was too annoyed to go back to sleep, but I sort of laid back down. I told my roommate about an hour later, and she sort of jokingly asked if it could have been the baseline killer. When she said that, my heart sank. Thinking about it, his face looked exactly like it did in the police sketches that were on the billboards everywhere. The only problem is that those billboards showed him with dreads, and the man at my window had no dreads. Apparently, he was some sort of disguise artist who'd wear wigs. I called the Phoenix police, and the detective I talked to agreed that it sounded like his MO. The suspect would say something to throw off his target, and then he'd blitz attack. The detective said that my angry response probably made me seem like too much of a hassle and moved on. I thought they might want to come out and try for samples, or to get surveillance video or something, but I didn't hear back from the detective. My parents freaked out. They got us knives, pepper spray, and put up signs. We then learned another tenant had complained that same morning. I never learned the details, but this idiot was apparently going around the complex trying to find a target. The stupid apartment wouldn't let us out of our lease, so we moved to a second-floor apartment right above our old unit. Anyways, on September 4th, 2006, they arrested Mark Gudu. I think the detective didn't call me back because they were days away from arresting him. When I saw his mugshot, I was sick, but also relieved. He was absolutely the guy outside my window. He's on death row in Arizona right now. His wife tried to mount some campaign to show that the police were framing him or something. On a personal level, it certainly would make for an interesting coincidence if this poor innocent man who they framed was also whispering like a creep and tapping on my window. I can't think of anything more scary than a serial killer tapping on your window. That actually happened to me, and if it happens to you, just scare them right back. Don't be afraid to be downright rude to someone who's injecting themselves into your space. It could save your life if you're not afraid to throw your weight around and tell someone off. You can still be a kind and generous person and still tell someone to screw off. Back in about 2000 or 2001, I was driving by myself back to Arizona after visiting my mom in Colorado. I was in a station wagon and had a desk with me that my mom had given me that used to be my grandfather's. I've always been scared about driving at night, worrying that someone might be in my back seat to get me. This might be because of watching too many scary movies, or maybe because my mom's paranoia rubbed off on me. I was in the army, and I would drive back and forth a lot to visit her. She would get mad at me for sleeping at rest stops or gas stations, and always told me that someone was going to kidnap and kill me. I just didn't want to be bothered with the hassle and expense of a motel most of the time. I was driving on an empty stretch of highway late at night with no other cars around. Suddenly, a red truck came up behind me, flashing his lights and honking his horn at me. I was thinking to myself that there might be something wrong with my car, or maybe there was something wrong with the desk and the hatchback, because why else would he be so insistent on pulling me over? So, I pulled over and got out of my car. As I was getting out of my car, he was directly behind me, still flashing his lights and honking his horn. I got to about the middle of the car, planning on going to the back to see what the issue was, when it hit me. Why was he still honking at me when I was out of my car? It was very odd. Then, he got out of his truck. That's when I knew something wasn't right. I jumped back in my car and sped off. The next exit was 45 miles or so away, and he followed me the entire time. I took the first exit and went to a crowded grocery store with a laundromat next to it. There was an ambulance parked at the laundromat with its lights flashing, so I pulled up next to it. I figured if there was an ambulance, then a police officer may eventually come. The man, however, stayed in his truck in the grocery store parking lot, watching me the entire time. I was terrified. I didn't want to get out of my car, and felt like an idiot if I would have to tell someone about what happened. I waited about an hour, and he finally left. After he left, I waited a little longer before continuing my drive back to Arizona. I was paranoid and watchful for any red trucks the entire time. Fast forward about 5 or 6 years, I was watching Unsolved Mysteries with my boyfriend at the time when a story popped up that immediately grabbed my attention. It was about a man on that exact stretch of highway with a red truck that used those exact tactics to get several women to pull over. He murdered all of them. I'm really glad my gut told me something was wrong, and I drove away.